Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Say Report. I'm your host, Devin Decker, and before we go any further, before we honor the person who we're here to honor today, I just need to pause before introducing my host companion, because I will now be welcoming him and introducing him as the Grand Poobah of Brendan Fraser, your champion of the Brendan Fraser Quiz of Brendan Fraser 2. Big round of applause for Siege and Sarawik.
Thanks, Dev.
Well, you earned it, Siegen, and for the next year, until the next Brendan Fraser History Month, you are the Grand Poobah of Fraser, my friend. Congratulations.
I might retire while I still have the belt.
Oh, no, don't be that person.
It's all it's been building up to, man.
Is just, once I won, I was going to walk away. But no, thank you for listening. Again, big thank you to Will for being a part of that. I'm glad that we finally got to address the Scrubs stuff. So if you haven't listened to those quiz things, there is more than just quizzes there. It's some good stuff. But that's it, right? This is the time. This is the moment. This is the culmination. I feel like it's been a year of culminations at the Say Report and, weirdly, the Adam Sandler Cinematic Universe.
Yeah.
Because here we all are going to the I guess, west side, right? Where's Idaho in relationship to the rest of the country?
I mean, it's pretty west. I mean, like, I wouldn't call it West Coast, but it's definitely what I would call the West.
It's west from me. It's east from you, right?
No, it's northwest from me.
Oh, northwest from you. Yeah, okay. So then we're heading to the west side, right? So I can talk about Moby songs. And we're here to talk about The Whale. Brendan Fraser's award-winning performance in Darren Aronofsky's The Whale. I honestly, when we started this crazy trip 8 years ago with a quiz that I sent you in an unmarked envelope, I did not think within 8 years we'd be talking about Brendan Fraser as an Oscar winner.
Within a decade, yeah.
That's
the rise.
I mean, we had a 10-year plan,
it's been
right?
Wild. Yeah, no, it's been a wild experience. It's like watching this kind of, because I think anybody would be forgiven thinking early on that it was like, ironic, or like it's just like a meme for us to do this bit, right? But then like when we started doing our own show, because you're referencing something that didn't even happen on the same report,
Right?
But when we did get this show together, it became it became pretty obvious to us that we needed to really lean into this to really kind of, solidify it, to really open up that, like, this was not a joke for us, like, it's hard to explain, because, like, it's not like I want anybody out there to think that we take this so seriously that this is, like, this was the identity of the show, but at the same time, like, we do mean it when we talk about our love for this man.
To the fact that I spoke to a friend I haven't spoken to in about a year. I had a phone call with them yesterday. I'll shout them out. How you doing, Sherman? Thank you. It was lovely talking to you yesterday. And some of the first things that they brought up with me was, are you aware of Killers of the Flower Moon, the new movie with Brendan Fraser? And like, yeah, no, we've been like really excited for it already because it's one of Siegen's favorite books. And then like the addition of Brendan Fraser, that's this whole other thing. And then, she asked what I was doing later that night, and I said, well, I'm finally going to watch The Whale so we can talk about it. And the response was, oh, I'm so excited to hear you two talk about that movie. We're not a comedy podcast, but we're more comedic than tragic. So,
we're not a comedy podcast only by the nature of the fact that we're not very funny most of the time.
Yeah, right.
That doesn't...
I make myself laugh.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, I don't know where, like, I don't even know where to begin with this, right? Like, I feel like we've been asked to give an Oscar speech after a decade of being blacklisted from Hollywood.
Right.
but there's this idea that like we kind of were never expecting this, only by the nature of not that we don't love the man and the work that he does, but just that the world does not often recognize greatness, right? Like, I think that's really more where this hesitancy and this kind of awe comes from, is not that we ever doubted that he was capable of this. As we've said, many times, this season, but seasons past, as we've watched Brendan Fraser movies, we have looked at these films and we have always said, like, this is the man, like, acting his fucking heart out, and like, just no matter what movie we've talked about, no matter how long he's been on screen, we've talked about movies where he's been on screen for a minute. We've talked about movies where he's been on screen. We're gonna talk about a movie today where he's on screen the entirety of the, like, he is in this movie.
There is one scene that he is not front and center for, and even
Yes.
then, his presence is there.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's. And the other
Yeah,
thing is, so I watched this one and Gods and Monsters with the whole family. Both of those are watched with the whole family. And afterwards, my mother's like, I don't know if you guys are geniuses or what, but the way that The Whale paralleled Gods and Monsters, like that one specific scene. I mean, like, so spoilers for The Whale is something that I'm going to say. You didn't come to listen to an episode called The Whale Report and expect that we were going to pull any punches. It's out there. It's available to rent. I don't think it's streaming anywhere yet as part of a package. I did have to purchase a copy of it, which I was more than happy to do.
Oh yeah, it's not available on any services, but it
Yeah.
is available to stream. You just got to purchase it.
Yeah, you can purchase it from like Vudu, and I got it off of
And
Amazon
Amazon and
Prime,
stuff, yeah.
Apple. It's available wherever
Google
digital videos
Play?
are filmed.
Google Play is weirdly, this is like a tangent for a second, but like Google Play is weirdly offering an SD version of this movie, which I didn't even think they did anymore. Are we at a point where I thought we were at a point where SD was just pretty much phased out, right? Like, but
So-
unless it was an older film that it had standard definition, and they don't want us, they're saying you're paying, X more to watch the AD version, and then there's more to pay the 4K version. But any movie that has come out in the last like 2 years that I have purchased streaming or rented streaming, my options have always been either HD or 4K. But I went into this one today on Google Play and there was an SD version available, and I was like, I don't want it, but that's wild.
Well, I mean, based on the fact that this film is in full frame, it's a 4:3 film. I almost wonder if it was shot with standard definition in mind. That is something I would be very interested to view.
Well,
Especially,
we got to talk a lot about Aronofsky and the look of this movie and what goes on, and to that point, the writer of this movie, Samuel D. Hunter, I think, to be
Yep.
SAG specific or WAG specific, as it were. But yeah, we're gonna talk about a lot of that too. So yeah, I do wonder if maybe there's like a standard definition, like as in like the intended version of this film or something. I'd be very curious to hear somebody talk about that. Because yeah, I mean, granted, a lot of the movies that I've bought over the last couple of years or rented again over the last couple of years have been things like Marvel movies and animated movies, and so like in that regard, like they're already half CGI, if not full CGI. So like SD just really doesn't exist, I guess, for that kind of film anymore.
yeah, it's never been
I want to
rendered
see
in
Way
SD.
of Water, the SD version.
That's the way James Cameron intends you to watch it.
Yeah, because then it looks like everything is underwater. But yeah, so going into this movie today, like renting this movie, renting this movie today, and that was like the first thing I was confronted with. I was already just kind of like, where are we going with this? And your mom's not wrong. Like as I'm watching this movie, I was just like, yeah, this is clearly content he is drawn to. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and that because it's so spoilers again. If you want to go see the movie, we're about to dive right into it. It is the
and I think maybe we should also quickly say, I mean, maybe I'm speaking out of turn for you, Dev, but yes, go see this movie.
Oh yeah,
Like,
go
if
see
you're
it. I
really-
mean, yeah, this is not going to be one where we hold back on it. Definitely worth a viewing. I'm not
Yes.
upset that I ended up buying it rather than just renting it. I don't think I'm going to watch it again like immediately, but this is definitely one I think I will put on again at some point. I mean, not just because I do a Brendan Fraser like month as part of the podcast, but because like there was some really just exceptional acting in this film, and not just from Brendan Fraser. Like,
yeah, for sure.
but that scene
yes.
where the last scene where he's with Thomas, Ty Simpkins' character, like, and he's like, "Do I disgust you?" And he's moving in, and like, this is so like James Whale, the way he was approaching Clayton as he wanted him to kill him, like just. It just felt really good. And then to talk about all the absentee father stuff, which was basically the theme of with honors and harebrained, right?
Well, and to that point, Gods and Monsters. I mean,
Yeah,
Frankenstein itself is a story of an absentee father, right? Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. No, like the whole, yeah. It's like I said, this is clearly you can see why he wanted to be involved in this movie,
Yes.
you know, and then the payoff, right, of
And
the
then the
Oscar
payoff of
win.
God for winning an Oscar and suddenly
Yeah.
being like, I don't think it's that Hollywood ever turned their back on him. I mean, he was definitely fucked over by the Academy. I'm not going to shy away from saying that. And he was treated poorly for some of the things that he was just truthful about. The way that, Hollywood had a habit of doing pre like 2018. And I don't know if it's actually all cleaned up. I just know that they're trying to be better about it.
I mean, have we ever openly talked about why? I mean, at least the stated reason why he was not working for so long, or at least working in a much more measured fashion. I don't
So
know.
I think we've talked about definitely how he broke his back fixing the gazebo, but we've never gone further than that.
Okay, I mean, like,
And
one
I
of the
think
bigger
this is
things.
the place. Yeah, like
Yeah, I mean, I mean, it's the reason why, like, he kind of fell to the wayside and became a bit of a meme for a while was because he stepped away. And unfortunately, like in this, when people aren't getting information in this country, they just decide to make shit up. And so, you hear a lot of like stories about why he left Hollywood, blah blah blah. But the biggest thing was that, I mean, and this came out more during the Me Too stuff, but he had an incident with the president of the Hollywood Foreign Press, right?
yeah,
Wasn't it the guy that was like running the whole
it was the
shebang that
guy
he
up top. Yeah,
yeah, and like he was assaulted in some fashion, and I'm not gonna like go into nitty-gritty details because to be entirely honest, it has not been completely put out there all the details because he was very changed by the incident and by all accounts tried to talk to people about it and was just like ignored because this guy was the president of the Hollywood Foreign Press. And again, without knowing full details of everything, because I don't think we ever will on this story, I don't know if it was by his own choice or by somebody else's. He stepped away for a long time because when he realized why he was being used the way he was being used, both on screen and now off screen, it hit him. Like, and this is a thing that affects all of these people that are involved in this sort of movement that we've seen over the last 5-10 years is like people coming out and admitting like it wasn't just one incident, but here is like a specific example of the ways in which I was being treated and I just didn't want to do that anymore. And like, yeah. And so so he steps out of the spotlight for a while. And then yeah, add to that also he had issues with like he broke his back and then didn't he and through that got like at
he had
least
some
dependent
painkiller
on
addiction. Yeah.
yeah, like I don't know if he would call it addiction or if that's what it classifies as, but he at least became dependent on them in a way that was not suitable for him to also keep working at the same time. And so like there was just a whole bunch of stuff all at once, but it did lead to him stepping away for a while. And so being able to then come back and come back with a vengeance is amazing. And it's one of the more interesting things because of all of this over the last year was the ways in which the Hollywood Foreign Press specifically treated this film and the ways in which he treated their reactions to it, which was measured but clearly much sharper than anything going on this side of the world, right? Like he I think he straight up just didn't go to some events, right?
Yeah, he by all accounts he blackballed them. Like
Yeah,
I'm not gonna give you my
yeah,
time
yeah.
because why would you? Honestly, if you're put into that situation and you could still make a livelihood, because even as he stepped out of like the big spotlight the way that he had been, it's not like he ever stopped working.
Right.
Like and he never got to, and this is nothing against Nicolas Cage, and he never got to the Nicolas Cagean levels of like I'm out of the spotlight, but these are the
Well,
movies that I'm making. Like
yeah, because I think the difference is that Nick Cage was for all of the shit in his life financially in a place where he had to do that kind of shit. I mean, you could say the same thing about somebody like Liam Neeson. I think Liam Neeson's actually a more apt thing because it wasn't that Liam Neeson, for anybody that has not been paying attention, he had his, good 5 to 10 years of like the Nick Cage-esque. I'm going to be in 3 movies this year, and one of them will actually be seen, right? Like that kind of thing. Whereas what he was doing, what Liam Neeson openly has admitted, is it's after he lost his wife. Like he just kind of just dove headfirst into just taking any project that came his way so that he could keep working, right? So it is a much more of a mental, personal block that way. Whereas like Nick Cage, we can give him all the shit in the world for the choices that he's made in his life financially, but he did get pretty fucked by Enron in 2008. So like he was kind of in a position since 2008 to have to take anything that came his way.
Right, and he's done some great stuff too. But it's one of those things where everybody says like, "Oh, what happened to Brendan Fraser?" And that's where the meme started. But he was in the Trust show, which was just All the Money in the World, but as a TV show.
Yeah.
He'd been in Doom Patrol since 2018, right? Like,
I mean, we're
he
talking
was
like
working.
he also had
Yeah.
a couple of, I mean, in this time period, I would even say like little moments where he did his thing, where he's like, you know, I'm going to work with the people I want to work with. I'm going to work with the friends I have. So you get him showing up as Joe in G.I. Joe, right?
Well, I mean, that was
Oh
a
no,
little
that's
bit. That
Bruce
was way
Willis,
earlier. Yeah,
but nah. I mean, like I
as
would
Hawk,
argue
as
that
Colonel
that's
Hawk.
pretty
But
much that was one of the first times where I saw him and me and other people in the group with me went, man, Brendan Fraser, I haven't seen you in a while. Like that was like the early hints of he's kind of just doing his own thing for a while. Was like that kind of stuff where because for anybody that doesn't know, the first G.I. Joe is directed by I can't think of the guy's name, but it's the guy that did the Mummy
the
movies,
Mummy
right?
guy, I can't think of his name either right
Soderbergh,
now.
right? Is it Soderbergh? No,
Well, I'm
it's
on the page. Hold on. Rick O'Connell, Stephen Summers.
Summers. That's who it is. Yeah. So he, so Stephen Summers says, I've got a 5 minutes on screen for you if you're interested, and that he'll do. Like, so to your point, like it's not that he's not working. He's doing his thing. He's taking uncredited cameos. He's showing up on television, which we learned through the Scrubs stuff is really like a thing that he seems to adore doing. Like there's a whole lot of stuff that Brennan does for Brennan for
Yeah.
about 10, 15 years here. And then this past year really feels like kind of the acknowledgement of exactly that, right? It's not his comeback to Hollywood. It's this acknowledgement that he has been there putting the work in for, I mean, at this point, 25 years, right? Like
Almost
people
30.
are celebrating, it's that thing that we kind of give the Oscars shit about sometimes, but I think here it really worked the way it should.
Yeah.
This wasn't just an Oscar for The Whale, although fucking hell, his acting in this movie definitely deserves an Oscar. So I don't want to imply that, but this was definitely the baggage of we we've owed you this for a while, right? Like the world, the art form of film has owed you this recognition for some time, sir. And like and so I think a lot about the ways that like Leo won for the not Cocaine Bear, the prequel.
The Revenant. He
Revenant,
alive,
right?
damn it.
I don't think that is and like Leonardo DiCaprio can take a little criticism from some asshole sitting in the middle of the country with it. So like I don't think The Revenant's Leo's best work as far as acting is concerned. There's a lot of just clear choices that he makes in that without much like depth to them and blah blah blah. And I think it's because I think the movie in general is not that deep of a film. Like I think that the movie is just not the Oscar winning movie that he wins for, right? But Leo had done so much work up to that point that like it really felt like it was like, okay, we owe you this one. That's gross, right? Like that's not the way it should work.
Yeah.
They should like an artist should win on the merits of the work that they're being awarded for, but we cannot ignore when somebody like Brendan Fraser is in this position, wins this award for a movie that he should win for. There also just feels like this like cathartic like release of relief, like we like finally like we've recognized this talent.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's been hard to listen to some of the stuff with people talking about like Brendan Fraser and oh my God, where did he go? And now he's finally back and all that because we do this show. We are in a very unique position to consistently recognize that the man has been working. We've included something new pretty much every year. Sometimes it's just been Doom Patrol, right? But
Yeah.
we've included something relatively new in every season that we've done.
Yeah, I mean, No Sudden Move unfortunately came out like between seasons, and we had already had our sixth season like planned to be sort of a victory lap sort of thing.
And we hadn't been doing our Breath of Frazier. We had not really gotten into that mode yet, right?
Yeah.
When that one.
Yeah, And but I don't think we could have taken that breath of fresh air until Hollywood and like the country collectively, like finally was able to let that breath out and be like, yeah, like we're
stop us from doing
acknowledging
brain candy.
we did brain candy for a reason. It's because kids in the flippin' hall, had a new season, right? On Amazon. That's the reasoning. And also, since you brought The Revenant up, right? And we should be talking about The Whale, but since it's been brought up, turns out that like everything that Leonardo DiCaprio did was in like that environment. He really put his body through hell. He was doing that stuff in like very low temperatures and things like that. So I think that's the other reason why that was the one that was finally like, if we're going to give him an award, let's give him this one.
I guess,
where he kind of tortured himself.
But again, he does that for every role. I mean, like Django, which I think is a role he should have won for, right? Django Unchained is a film in which he, as an actor, is pushing himself in a direction he has never really gone, at least on screen for us before, right? Like so he's doing something there. And like famously, there's the moment where he breaks the glass and cuts his hand open, and like did actually cut his hand open on set, but just didn't stop. So Tarantino just uses that cut in the movie, like that. Like so, if you want to talk about like Leo abusing his body for an Oscar, he'd done that before and didn't win.
Right, but it's just. Once someone told me that about The Revenant, because I didn't think The Revenant was that. I was super excited to see The Revenant, and then I'm like, oh, it's just like basic revenge story, and okay.
I think it's a phenomenal winter western, and so like within westerns there is a subgenre of the winter western. I think one of the most Jeremiah Johnson is probably one of the best examples of it like ever. But like that whole area. Fantastic movie in that regard, but it is so niche genre to get to that point that like you got to be into that sort of thing in order to enjoy that movie, and they're not my favorite kind of movies.
Yeah, but it was. But then when someone finally said, "But you know that he wasn't on a soundstage; he was out in the cold, really suffering. Like he's shivering because he's really shivering," and I'm like, "Oh, okay." Then like, yeah, I give him credit for the performance that he put on because he put himself into that situation. That's not the conversation I'm like. Brendan Fraser did the work in The Whale, and he deserved the win, and I'm super happy that he got it.
I want to say one last thing, just tangential to The Whale before we get into it, because I do think you're right. We should just start talking about this movie because I have a lot I really want to celebrate about this film. But the last thing I want to say is this movie really reminded me how big of a person literally Brendan Fraser is, right? Like, and we're we'll get into the makeup stuff and all of the stuff about the overweight like character and stuff like that, but I mean like he is imposing just as a human sometimes, right? Aronofsky does a phenomenal job in moments of this movie of making him larger than life, literally, but like there was this just like it struck me. This is what always happens with really good makeup is I immediately start thinking about like how they use the person under the makeup's natural form, like to hide. Like good makeup doesn't like create a character. Good makeup supports a character, right? And so like I was just looking at moments of this where he just stands up and he's just looming over people. And this isn't anything about him being overweight. It's about him just already having been a big dude to begin with. And like it was just something that I'd never really thought about before. But when I thought about movies like Airheads, which we revisited this year, right? Or I was thinking a little bit about him as Link, like specifically too, like where he's just George of the Jungle. That was the one where like there's those moments with him and Leslie Mann where he is just towering over her, and it's like the cover of a romance novel, right? Like purposely so. I think in that movie there are bits where literally the wind blows and his hair flies back, right? Like he's just just an imposing force on camera. It's what made him so like such a good action hero, I think, like in movies like The Mummy and stuff, is that when he wants to, like he can frame himself in a way that makes him just like somebody not to be fucked with.
Yeah. I mean that when he stood up for the first time in this movie, I'm like, oh, and he was a big dude too. It's not like he's fat, looking this fat because he's a short guy. He is still like the 6 feet tall
Well, the
that
one that get the
yeah,
thing in this movie specifically that really got me about that was any of the photos of him and Alan,
yeah,
him of the photos and his lost boyfriend. Like it just the shots of the two of them, he is always like cradling him. He's always
yeah.
cradling Alan. It was just I was like, holy shit, yeah, you forget how big he is. You know, I think the other best example of that in retrospect is Doom Patrol, and I know that he doesn't always play Cliff. Like we should always remember that there are actual like really talented actors that play Cliff and what's what's his nuts?
The Negative Man,
Yeah,
whose
I was gonna
character's
say Negative
name
Man, but I wanted his actual name.
is
Anyway, so yeah, but like Robot Man and Negative Man, there we go. We'll put him on even feel better.
Larry Trainer.
Those are yeah,
Yeah,
Larry and Cliff are played on set by different people than
yeah,
the voices that we hear, except for when you see some really good stuff with like you know, flashbacks and stuff. And that's what I mean is like when they go into those flashbacks and it's like him stomping around like the racetrack and stuff, and he's just this bigger dude. Like he like again, you don't want to fuck with him. It's also really funny because you think of a guy that big and you think, man, there's no way you'd be a successful race car driver. You'd weigh that car down so much you'd
yeah,
lose
you
every
would.
match. Yeah,
Well,
but
it's
yeah, like
yeah, because I mean, because it's
that's why
Matthew
he drives
Zuck.
stock cars.
Yeah, yeah, it's Matthew Zuck as Negative Man and Riley Shanahan, who is the Robot Man when we see it, and Brendan Fraser's doing the voiceover. But then the one that is like always stuck in my head is Robot Man is he's a robot, so you see him standing that way, and then when you see Cliff in the underground when he actually goes in to try to save Jane, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like he's the same size as Robot Man.
Yeah, he's
Like
a big dude
he
as
is
well. Yeah.
like yeah, he's a big dude, and that's also reflected, and credit where credit's due. Matthew Libatique, the cinematographer, does a lot of great camera work where anything that would be from his perspective is sort of shot on a down angle.
Is this in the whale or is this
It's
in
in the
sorry, just
whale.
to
It's
clarify?
specifically in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
whale, because my
Yeah.
mother,
Well, and yeah, sorry,
yeah, no,
finish your thought.
she's like, I really hate this camera work, and I'm like I get why. I'm like, well, I understand a little bit of it, and then when he stood up that first time, and I'm like, and that's what really sells it for me is the fact that he is this big imposing figure, and it's not just because of his weight, but it is his height, and like we just haven't seen that yet to sort of make that understood as an audience member. It's also
Yeah,
meant to
it's
feel like claustrophobic too. Like
right.
there's a
Yeah, no,
lot
I mean
going on.
there's so much going on in this movie. Yeah. I just like the one shot in this movie for me in that regard, like seeing him in like the overweight body and like why like that whole thing is the framing of him coming down the hallway when he's walking down that hallway and he comes through the doorway and it just shows that he's filling that whole space. And you can say that part of that is because of the nature of him being this you know this obese figure, but like that doesn't account for height. Like
Yeah,
eating a lot does not just make you taller too, right?
I wish. No, it yeah, his
Yeah,
head
no,
is like almost touching the ceiling. And he's hunched over a little bit cuz he's using the walker. Like there's a lot of beautiful stuff. And God, I guess the last thing I have to say before we talk about the movie is was this performed at some point when we were in college? I feel like there was a time where people were going to see the stage production of The Whale.
So the whale for Sam Hunter is I see. So I know I do think that people were doing scenes from this. So I do think it is old enough for that, but I'm trying to remember like you got to remember I got 10 extra years of like
Yeah,
grad school and shit
sorry.
too, so it's hard for me to like to parse those. The bigger one from Sam Hunter that I was aware of is the like proof of the existence of God, I think is the name of it. Let me see if I can get the full name for it. A case for the existence of God, which is this wild little like two person talking headpiece of like a guy trying to apply for a loan, and like it's this whole thing about how like one of them is this you know one of them is this single father raising a daughter, and the other one the guy that he's applying the guy that is applying for the loan is this somewhat successful single like teacher that wants this and he's not eligible for it, and like there's all of this conversation about like class and race and like all of this stuff, but again it's just kind of a talking headpiece. It's just two guys, so it's used a lot in acting classes
Yeah.
because it's really easy to pull out 3 pages and just have two people sit in chairs and talk to each other. That's the one that I'm more familiar with of his work.
So it occurred to me, because it didn't come out. The Whale, the play, was not until 2012. So there's no way it could have been while we were in undergrad.
Yeah, so it must have been while I was in grad school.
It was when you were in grad school, and it was specifically when Will and I were visiting. There was stuff about a performance of it.
Yeah,
somewhere.
Probably. Danny and the Deep Blue Sea is the one that I kind of get it confused with a lot, which is wild because they really have nothing to do with each other. But when people talk about the Whale, I always first think of Danny, and then when people talk about Danny and the Deep Blue Sea, I think of the Whale. So like maybe that's where you're getting wires crossed, because that was a ton of stuff. We had a couple of people doing scenes from that, because that was really popular when we were in undergrad.
I wasn't surprised. Like, my mother was surprised to see that it had been a play. And I'm like, no, of course. This was a one. It was Dale who was surprised, because my mother's like, of course it was a play. It's all one location, and you could totally see how you do this on a stage the way that the movie was made, which I'm a big fan of. I have to admit that. That is something that I really do like, when a play is adapted and they think about the fact that, like, what if this were still on a stage? One Night in Miami actually did a really good job of that as well.
You know, it distinctly does not do that. To its credit, it is also an award-winning film. But Doubt is like, you watch the film version of Doubt, and it's like, I don't understand how they could ever put this on stage. And then you go see it on stage, and it totally makes sense.
And you're like, because they didn't make it this way.
Because they didn't bother with scenery. But yeah.
It tickled the whole theatrical part of my background. It excited me because of Brendan Fraser, but then just the way that it was cinematically created. Like, this is a well-made movie.
Yeah.
I mean, it's Darren Aronofsky.
Part of that is because exactly. Part of that is because we're talking about Aronofsky, which is like we're talking about probably one of the best filmmakers of our time. I will definitely say one of my favorites of our time. You know, like the dude does weird work, but I love his weird work. The Fountain will forever.
And that's what I was going to say. I didn't connect with Darren Aronofsky the way that other people our age seem to until I saw The Fountain. And then nobody but you seemed to enjoy The Fountain.
Well, so the big one for him, the big one for Aronofsky back in the day was Requiem, right? Requiem for a Dream. And I don't like that movie. I don't like that movie, though, not because of the film. Like, I think we watched it for film classes. Like, people would watch it to study all this shit. I think it's a well-made movie. The content and the story and all of that sort of stuff really kind of just don't speak to me. Let me put it that way. I just don't connect with it and don't want to. Right. So like, I just don't love that movie the ways that, like, again, it was another one of those movies that people had like posters on the wall for it. You're just like, really? Of all the things you want to identify yourself with, this is the movie? Cool. So for me, the Fountain kind of came along, and I just was like, this looks weird, watched it, loved it, then found out it was the same guy that had made Requiem, and I was like, oh, okay. Like, that's wild. And then the movie that cinched it for me was after loving The Fountain and then getting to see The Wrestler a couple of years later. Like, I was like, okay, I really do like this guy's work. As much as I don't love this big one of his that everybody else seems to, like, I can still understand why everybody like is behind this guy. And then, you know, since then we've gotten all sorts of great stuff from him. I love Black Swan. I secretly kind of really liked Noah.
I love Noah. Noah is one of the movies that saved me. I'm not gonna lie.
Noah is one of those weird ones that, because it's got such a religious like hook to it, it's hard to enjoy it because of the ways in which, like, I don't think it's any surprise to anybody that listens to this show. Like, the Bible is good fiction to us, right? Like we're not here talking about like how it's the good book that everybody needs to read. But there's some fun shit that happens in that book that if they want to put it on screen, I'll watch it. Give me a Harryhausen version of the Bible. Oh my God. That would be amazing.
I mean, yeah, Noah was one of those movies. I had a bad day at work. There was an early morning meeting, and like, they completely downplayed the importance of my department in the office that I worked at. And like, I felt like garbage. I felt like garbage after the meeting. And my manager saw me and she said, you should probably take the rest of the day off. 'Cause like, it was one of those things where if I had stayed in the office, I probably would have ended up quitting. Like, it's just like, wow, I give my heart and soul to this company, and then like you're going to dress me down, and it just felt like a personal attack. So I took my the manager's advice. I took the day off. I went to the Dirt Theater in East Providence, and I saw Noah for $1.
Yeah.
And it really reinvigorated me in a way that, like, very few films can I say have had that effect on me. And honestly, I don't even think of it as a Darren Aronofsky film. It was something that occurred to me immediately before we started filming. That, like, oh yeah, he did that weird Noah where angels, and I'm putting that in that, were like rock monsters. But then also, there are some, like, translations of the Bible where, yeah, that's what they would have been. Because they're of nature. Like, yeah, and I really, that movie blew me away in terms of stuff. That's probably my favorite Darren Aronofsky film.
Then he does Mother, which is fucking wild.
Another movie I saw at the Dirt Theater. Just that's where I go for my Aronofsky.
It takes the drama, it takes the dripping kind of Oscar baity like nonsense of something like The Whale, and it is an Oscar baity film, and we'll talk about that too. But it takes all of that and then wraps it in the weirdness of The Fountain, and it just becomes fucking nuts.
It's nuts. That movie's insane.
Yeah, I don't know if I like it or not, but man, is it a thing that
It's a movie that I saw that will stick with me.
Yeah. Oh man. But yeah, so there's Mother, but then you get The Whale, and this is another one that just comes back around. It just really solidifies for me that like I really do like Aronofsky as a filmmaker. I just like I said, I think he might be one of the best filmmakers going right now, but I know that he is also somebody that he's an auteur. He has a style to him that you really need to kind of be into to kind of really get behind. Who he really jives with nowadays, that if you're into like weird shit, is Ari Aster, right? And I'm really curious to go see Beau is Afraid right now, because I feel like this is probably him kind of dipping his toe into something like Mother or The Fountain. But Ari Aster's like work with stuff like Hereditary, I think was one of his, but definitely Midsommar.
Yeah.
Like the guy is making just weird horror movies that have more meaning to them than you would think from the plot synopsis, right? Which I think is like an Aronofsky special, right? Like you read what the movie's about and you're just like, this is weird, and then you go and see it and you're like, it was about so much more than that.
I mean, that's Pi. The movie Pi. Yeah. Like I remember for Pi Day, me and this friend of mine from high school, we ended up getting a Pi from Stop and Shop and renting Pi from Blockbuster and watching it, and I'm like, this movie is a lot. But all the people who have told me to see this movie, I don't think they knew what this movie was about.
I don't think they realized what they were watching.
Like, I don't think they grasped the full, like, religious aspects. And, like, and that, like, to get into The Whale, that was one of my favorite conversations in this film, where Ellie first meets Thomas, and her whole, like, dressing down of religion, religion is great for stupid people, but I don't know why admitting you're a stupid person makes you better than me. Like, that was like oh, wow. That sounded like things that Devin Decker has said for 2000, Alex.
And so like, let's get into the meat and potatoes here. Yeah. That's what this movie is. This is a movie of conversations, and I think that Samuel Hunter, like, I think that's kind of where he as a writer really focuses. As I said, the one that I really know him for is this one where it's all about these two dudes literally just talking for an hour and a half. And the thing about that is that it's called, the existence of God, but like they don't ever talk religion. It's like that's not like it's this weird idea that like the title makes you kind of think about that later, and you think about the ways in which that might mean something in the story, but the story never parses that out, right? Unlike The Whale, where it's a little on the nose in a million different ways, right? He's playing more with like the punny aspect of using that term in 3 different ways or whatever. It's But like you mentioned the religion, and I'd be hard pressed to not point out that like even the writer of this, like Aronofsky, also loves that kind of stuff, because I mean look at stuff like The Fountain and shit like that,
Yeah.
right? But then on top of that, you also have the writer is also really playing in that playground a lot too with the work that he's got. Yeah, there's definitely some really interesting stuff there. But the idea that this is a movie of just conversations, which, some of the best acting movies are, but that doesn't always equate to a fun movie to watch, you know?
Yeah, that's true. And here's the thing: this movie is kind of a depressing movie.
Oh,
Before we
definitely.
started it, the thing was any of us can walk out of here if it's just too much for us, right? And there's no judgment. You don't need to stop it. If we want to check out, we can check out. And now that was the other three people, members of my family, who said that. And I'm like, okay, but I feel like that's a bit of a defeatist attitude. Like, yeah, this movie is probably going to be depressing, right? But at the end of it, like, if you go through the whole journey, I think there's going to be hope on the other side. So, like, if you check out, like, at 30 minutes because I can't do this anymore, you're kind of doing yourself a disservice because you'll just remember The Whale as this sad movie
Yeah,
that
yeah.
does end with, like, a really cool, like, hopeful message.
Yeah, I think in order to really kind of talk about that, we need to talk about the end, but we can't talk about the end until we talk about kind of the beats of the rest of the movie, right?
Yeah.
So as much as this is just a movie of just different conversations, like it is held together by this thread of like so Charlie is teaching a class,
Yeah.
is overweight. We don't really know like much more about what's going on there. He's got a nurse that's coming by. That's how this whole thing kind of starts, right? And then we learn as we go that he has a child, an ex-wife, but he also at some point had a boyfriend. And the story goes that we find out that he realized, or kind of had always known, but really connected with a student of his. And the movie tries to do some like backflips around this by claiming like, well, he teaches night school and these people are adults and blah blah blah. He was still a student. Like that's the and that's important because it comes up kind of pretty frequently with his daughter and stuff about how like he is a teacher that left his wife and child because he realized that he was gay and loved this student of his, right?
Yeah.
And then, because of some religious stuff involving his partner commits suicide, and it drives him to become this obese figure that we see him with as the beginning of this movie. And then we also learn that his nurse is actually the sister of his ex-boy, or I hesitate to say ex-boyfriend because that's
It's
not what it is.
partner.
But
They're
his yeah
partners. Like, he
no, his
calls him.
past, but right,
Yeah.
but his like lost partner, right? Like
Yeah.
X is the thing I'm
Yeah.
struggling with
X was not around.
because he
His
right,
deceased partner. His deceased boyfriend. Like,
yeah, yeah. And he's constantly getting a pizzas delivered by a very specific character, which is important because at some point that character finally sees Charlie for the first time and is so we're people interpret what happens in that moment, by the way, as the pizza delivery guy like seeing him for the first time being disgusted and running away. And I don't know if I agree with that, but for now, like we'll stick with that because that's what Charlie thinks.
yeah.
Like it doesn't matter. It
And
doesn't
that's
matter
what's.
what I think is actually happening. It is what Charlie thinks. And so it causes Charlie to go on a binge, which he then in that like emails his class like fuck everything, just write me something important to you as opposed to any of this other bullshit, which of course leads to Charlie losing his job. And the end of this movie is him realizing that he's lost his job, he might be losing his daughter, he might be losing his life. And his daughter reads to him an essay that she wrote in eighth grade that, as far as Charlie is concerned, is probably the best thing he's ever read. And this movie ends on a question. Does Charlie die at the end of this movie?
I mean, I interpreted it as that. I thought that he died.
I
um,
think that this movie is so on the nose in every other aspect that I think it's pretty obvious that he does.
yeah. I
I
mean,
just, it seems to betray so much of this movie's message that Charlie dies at the end of this film.
Well, I mean, word of creator is Darren Aronofsky, and again, that this doesn't necessarily answer the question. It's just the director's intent is that Charlie passes away.
Yeah.
Aronofsky has gone on record as saying, the way I see it, Charlie dies at the end. And I understand what you're saying, like, where it betrays so much of it, because it's like him finding a reason to live, and then at the end of it, he still passes away. But in a weird way, like, finding that thing to live for also kind of gives him a thing to, like, die for. I don't know. It's such a strange thing.
I think the bigger thing is that we, in retrospect, Charlie was dead before this movie even started. We are watching Charlie in a literal purgatory of his own making, even.
Yeah.
That is him trying to finish some unfinished business before he finally lets go. It is the loss of his boyfriend, Alan, that is truly Charlie's real death. And everything after that is him just trying to make up for some of the shit he fucked up on the way, but he's gone. And so, like, the end of this movie is not him necessarily dying, but rather being released, right? Which I think is kind of what you're getting at.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and no, I don't think he's a ghost or any of that shit. I think he is alive, but I think that this idea that he somehow finally finds salvation and in that moment dies, that kind of sucks. The like I have to reevaluate my entire like feelings about everything about this movie, because I was so hopeful that he was going to find his way out, and then then the second he does, I'm led to believe that he then dies. That sucks, right? But Aronofsky does leave it up to interpretation. Like, as much as he as much as we can talk about like this idea that he sees it this way, even in that very comment, he's opening up the idea that, but I don't, but you may see it differently, right? By not saying, no, he dies, the end, period, no question. Like, he doesn't say it that way, right? He's like, right. And so there's this question of, does he or does he not? And I just think that, again, I don't think the movie really lends itself to that big of a question, because so much of the rest of this movie is so on the nose.
Yeah. I mean, here's the quote from Aronofsky. Although the movie keeps it ambiguous, he has unequivocally stated he intended for Charlie to die at the end, like he does with all of his characters, the one exception being Noah in Noah, because he does not die in the source material. Which, that's interesting. I guess I've never really thought of how many Darren Aronofsky films end with the main character's death. But yeah, it's all of them, isn't it?
Literally, The Fountain, we get it 3 times. It's crazy.
Yeah. So yeah, it's but that moment, it felt, I don't know. The thing for me, right, is what I really would like to talk about is his overeating, right? On some level, clearly based on the binge that we see during the runtime of the film, he eats out of sadness, anger, right? He self-soothes with food. But there's so much about how Alan, because of his loss of connection to the church, which is a made-up church in the movie called New Life, that apparently is part Jehovah's Witness, part Mormon, but it is the Mormon church in the original stage play.
Yeah.
Which is just, I just think it's, like, because I always thought it was Mormonism, like, until they said Idaho was where they were in the movie. I'm like, I don't know where they are. Like, is it Utah? Is it?
They got a pretty big Mormon presence in Idaho too. But
okay,
but yeah.
I'm not there like you are, my friend. So,
I think, if I remember, I'm trying to think of the Mormon, the one that they turned into the Andrew Garfield miniseries there.
Oh,
I think in that one, I think they talk specifically about a really awful sect of what's the proper word here? Orthodox Mormons in the Idaho area, actually, specifically.
Yeah, I haven't watched that one. I wanted to. What's the name of that one though? I want to get Under the Banner of Heaven.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like, I thought it was Mormonism until the scene where in the movie Ellie's like, "What are you, a Mormon?" He's like, "No, I'm from New Life," and it's like, "Oh, okay." Which always interesting there. But they do talk about Alan had stopped eating and was like like skinny and gaunt as a result of that before he took his own life. So then like there's that part of me that's thinking, was he overeating in a way to like make up for what Alan wasn't? Like
Yeah, I mean,
and that was
you know,
part of it. Like
you're poking at a really big bear right now, and that is that so much of this movie revolves around without ever really talking about mental health, right?
yeah,
Like the stuff on display on screen in this movie is all physical stuff, and there is this idea that it is because of depression that he looks like this physically, but this is this is where we start to talk about some of the stuff of the movie that I don't necessarily love, but in the regard that it is trying to capture actual humans, I think it does a great job of that because
mm-hmm.
fuck me, do humans ignore mental health all the goddamn time. But in terms of what I want this movie to do, and I think this gets to some of the criticism about it being quote unquote fat phobic and stuff, which I don't necessarily agree with, but I think the crack starts here and then people can pry it open as far as they want to for whatever problems they have with this film. But I think that the cracks really start to shine through in the regard that like you're pointing at this is a mental health issue for Charlie at the end of the day, as much as it is affecting his physical health, and so much of this movie is about focusing on the physicality of his issues. It is all born from a mental health issue. And I think that like the question is of like why is eating the thing that he settles on? That's a question people are literally at this moment probably sitting in a doctor's office trying to figure out. Is of all of the things to focus, some people eat their mattress, some people go out and they rob banks. Like people with mental health issues act out in all sorts of different ways. Why is Charlie's choice to be this thing? And I think part of it is probably some of what you're talking about, but I also think some of it is also punishment, right? Like self-flagellation is a huge part of Charlie's whole deal. And one of the easiest ways for humans to punish their own bodies, like jokingly or otherwise, is the stuff we put in it, right? Because like at the end of the day, like you cut yourself, all this other stuff, blah blah blah, your body negatively reacts to that. People see that and they get you help. If you start to eat and you eat a little bit more and you eat a little bit more, like that's a natural thing that your body does. So one of the biggest reasons why eating disorders are so dangerous is because you're only building on a natural thing your body needs to do to survive already, right? So like there is just like layers upon layers of mental health like on display in this movie, and it's just never properly addressed or discussed. But at the same time, this is not the kind of story where that's what they want to do. So it's this weird kind of balance you need to find in watching this movie, in understanding that Charlie is not well, right? Like Charlie is sick, and he's sick in more ways than we realize, which is again the point of this movie. So like knowing that, it kind of feels like they get a pass on not really diving into the mental health issues because it's because nobody's addressing the mental health issues that Charlie can't get better, right?
right. I mean, he's not even addressing the mental health issues of it. It's not anyone else. I mean, this movie is very much from the first scene. You know that Charlie is going to die, and I know that like that's with the benefit of having seen the movie. But that first scene where Liz, the nurse, comes in, played marvelously by Hong Chow. She is so good in this movie. I was so happy to see that she had been nominated for Best Actress in a Supporting Role. And then, like, at the same time, disappointed that just the tapestry that she has on display of emotion and physicality and different characters for the moment was not recognized. At the same time, Jamie Lee Curtis, I get it, right? Like, I
Yeah,
also
right.
understand it. But
But yeah, just the two scenes, like the duality of her character and how well she really plays it, is the scene where she has to save Charlie's life because he's choking on the sandwich, right? There's a moment where that whole scene where she has to help him like
Yeah.
roll over so that she can do the whole
gravity
Heimlich on him and
Heimlich
stuff.
thing. That is.
Yeah, it's that scene, and then compare that to the scene when she finds out about the money at the end, and just like the ways in which that character swings through true human emotions and trying to be there for Charlie because her brother loved Charlie, and all of this is just, oh man, yeah, she's phenomenal.
She's
She's a great
phenomenal
character, and she's a great actress.
in it. But that first scene where she takes his blood pressure and it is 236 over 194. I mean, like that, I'm like, the guy should be dead, right? Like that. Your blood pressure
At the very
is
least,
not.
his head should explode.
Yeah, right. Like those numbers were like the kind of numbers where like I almost threw up watching the movie, and it's a fictional character, right? But like from that moment, it's like at that point, and she even says it. She's like, "You have congestive heart failure. Like you're gonna be dead by the weekend." And the fact that that first scene starts with Monday, like, yeah, there's that little bit of you that does lend itself to the movie, and like him learning and maybe he's being more physical than we see him in the first day as the film goes on, that like maybe he's going to do something to better himself. But then when he ends up, flying away at the end, right?
Yeah, they totally Birdman the end.
They
of this.
totally
That's the other
Birdman
thing
the
is
end
that,
of this,
like,
right? Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Another movie I fucking adore, but yeah, the
yeah. Now I'm even more upset that Batgirl got shelved because friggin' Birdman and the Whale were both going to be in it as Batman and Firefly, respectively. Sorry. It's just like
someday we'll get a cut of that movie. Somebody will drop something, or at least a script, because man, I need to see what that story was.
I don't know. We will be talking about Max next week
Also,
on the
I
Say
need
Report.
Michael Keaton as Batman in 2023 and have it not be the Flash. And sorry.
We
That
will
was a
be
really
talking
angry
about
part of me.
all of this next week on the Say
That
Report.
was a really angry part of me that made its way out, and I was trying to hide it.
I understand why. It's my fault for bringing up Birdman, and then it's just a hop, skip, and a jump.
I
siege.
brought it up. I'll own that. So the nature of his death at the end of this movie is telegraphed from the very beginning. Again, it's not a very deep movie. Like that's the other big thing I would point to, is that I don't know if it's very purposefully on the nose, so I don't know if it's truly a criticism, but I don't know if I necessarily love, just like, they start talking about Moby Dick and what is the whale and who is Ahab and all of this stuff, and it's very shallow. Like, as much as there's a complex story going on here with all the different characters and all the different emotions and all of that, there's never a moment where you as an audience member like need to puzzle out everything in a scene. It's pretty much spoon fed to you the entire time. This movie holds your hand the entire way, all the way to your tears at the end, right?
Oh, I was crying from the beginning.
This movie is
like,
what this movie is. In all honesty, this movie is just like an hour and a half of hospice care. Like it is you there to see Charlie out the door, and it is going to guide you through every step of the way. Nothing's going to be complicated. You're going to know exactly when to kneel and when to stand, like all of that shit. Like this movie is just there to just provide a final rites for Charlie. And so with that, like I said, like in retrospect I see that, right? But man, in that first viewing, you get that punch in the gut and you feel cheated, because you're just like, after all of this I'm supposed to believe that Charlie died, and I didn't know how I felt about it coming out of that movie. I didn't like it, I'll be honest. Yeah. I knew how I felt about it, and I did not like, and I'm not sure if I still like, because like as much as I even understand where it came from, I can understand death and still fear it, right?
Right? I don't know, but then at the same time, I wonder if in some alternate universe where the movie doesn't end with him dying, like explicitly he doesn't end, is it Darren Aronofsky, who all of my main characters live except for Noah, because screw the source material. Like I don't know if we
Aaron Darrenofsky,
yeah. I wonder if we would be sitting here talking about the movie as like, he's in this sort of purgatory, he's in this like trapped thing, and then he lives. Like there's no cathartic release of it. He doesn't make, like, it would be, if he lived at the end of this, right? It would almost feel like a cop out. Like if he takes that money and gets like liposuction and things like that, I mean, what is his quality of life after that? Like how long would it be?
Yeah.
after neglecting his physical health. If he doesn't die on screen, right, or just at least heavily implied that he passes away on screen, then like he's eventually passing away sooner rather than later. And hopefully he lives for every one of those days because he doesn't need to keep punishing himself for what happened. But I just don't know. I feel like the best way to end it is with that passing.
Artistically, I think you're correct, and like that's the thing, that's the problem, right? Is it becomes this idea of like this is just how these stories end is like the reason. That's oh, that sucks that that's the only reason, right?
Yeah.
And you know, this is a very small criticism against a otherwise pretty fantastic movie, right? I know that you said earlier that you don't know if you it would be one that you would put on frequently, and like I get that. Why would you? This is a very sad film.
I just said I wouldn't
But
watch it
like,
again today.
but I will celebrate this movie.
Oh,
I
yeah.
will point to
All
this movie when
day.
people ask, you know, talk about like the acting and the directing and the cinematography and all of that. Like I think this is just a super well put together film. I think that I think it is a completely like everybody that is on screen knows what they're doing, right? Like I don't think there's a moment of anybody showing up in this movie where it's just like they don't get it. It's okay. Like we'll get through this 10 minutes and we'll move on. Like and you see that sometimes, especially in some of these more Oscar baity films, right? These ones that are aiming for Oscars. Sometimes you get somebody on screen that's just acting their fucking ass off because they know that the rest of this movie is going to get recognized. They want to get recognized too, and that's not what you see here, right? It's an it's a great piece of film, just period, right? And that is such a rare treat nowadays to like be able to just sit down and watch a movie and just be like, this is well put together, just all around, just well put together. That when you see it, like you kind of can't help but celebrate and love every part of it, you know?
Yeah, it's so of the movies that were nominated for Best Actor in a Leading Role, the only two that I've seen are Elvis and The Whale. And I can admit that Austin Butler, the way that he became Elvis, was really, really like impressive. The acting that he did was very impressive. And if he ended up walking away with that the Oscar for it, I'd completely understand it. But I think where he doesn't get that is because the film itself does not support the performance that he is putting in.
Yeah, Baz Luhrmann gets a little too up his own ass in Elvis. I love Baz Luhrmann and it, but it is an extremely Baz Luhrmann-y, Baz Luhrmann, Baz Luhrmann. Like that is the that movie is so that movie is so much just him just doing whatever the fuck he wants that I like. There's a podcast out there called Blank Check. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of it. It's a phenomenal podcast, but their whole bit is that they take the movies that filmmakers get to make when they basically have proven themselves enough that they're given a quote unquote blank check to make whatever movie they want, and then those are the ones that they dive into. I would have told you 1,000 times over that that was something like Moulin Rouge or even to some respects like Romeo and Juliet.
Australia.
But no,
Australia would
after
be his blank check movie for me. Like,
but even Australia, Australia was not a movie for us. Australia is a movie that is beloved outside of the United States because it is a celebration of a country that does not often get celebrated. It is ridiculous, and people give it shit for being like over the top and saccharine and blah blah blah. But at the end of the day, it still at least has an audience for it. I don't know anybody that saw Elvis and walked out of it being like, "That was the movie for me."
yeah.
I love Gatsby, and I know plenty of people that saw Gatsby that went in saying, I don't know if I didn't think I was going to enjoy Gatsby, but actually, this is a really fun version, a really great exploration of the source. Like, there is some weird shit going on in that movie, to be sure, but at least, like, the idea of the celebration of the Roaring Twenties being put on display in this way is, like, a fun, like, way to look at it. Elvis, people walked out just being like, I don't know if I ever want to think about Tom Hanks in this movie ever again.
I was the only person who stayed awake for the entirety of Elvis, and I was so mad that everybody else fell asleep. Like, credits started to roll, and I look around, and everyone else is asleep, and I'm just like, what the hell? Why am I the only one who saw all of that? It was, but like, and again, Austin Butler did a great job in that movie. The movie does not support that performance.
No,
The Whale
I agree.
completely. Everybody is supporting what is being done in the film. The film is, it's not just that it's compact, right? It's just like there's nothing extraneous in this movie. It is so good. The Whale as a film is just such a good movie. And even at like 2 hours long, it's not one of those movies where like I could cut like 30 minutes and still be fine.
Honestly,
Everything
I
is
didn't
important.
realize it was two. If you had told me it was a 70-minute film, I would have believed you. Like the way that
Yeah.
this movie just kind of just gets into shit and just goes. Like
It
I didn't realize
clips.
that I sat down for 2 hours with this film today.
Yeah. I mean, the only reason I did is because I like had to measure out time so that I could knew I would be in this seat ready to talk about it in time.
How do I watch this movie and go get Taco Bell and get back here in time? Oh, here's the rub.
Breakfast. I try to get breakfast before we record. There were some episodes this season where I knew I was dragging a little bit, and I have realized I need to have a meal before I record the Say Report. And that's what it is. So I try to make sure that I've eaten by 10:30 so that it's digested a little bit and ready to go. So yes, and Taco Bell was the food of choice. And that's probably just by the nature of the fact that, Charlie never ate Taco Bell. Anything else would have made me feel disgusting. I have leftover pizza, which was my plan to just warm up, and then I'm like, I can't eat pizza for like a week after watching him eat the pizza in the binge scene. Like it's
This so some of the we keep talking about like him in this movie and the ways in which there are parts of this movie that purposefully are framed to really upset you as an audience member, right? Like that's clearly why certain shots are shot in this film and things like that. There is it's a totally valid criticism that always needs to be explored. Like this is not me trying to write off anybody like just like hitting a hot button issue. There is a level of criticism levied at this film because of the ways in which it portrays obesity. Obesity, and the ways in which it is. I struggle with the term fat phobic, right? Like I'm not, for anybody that does not like know us personally. Like I am like somebody that has like never been what has been considered a good weight, right? Like so I'm not gonna throw my hat in the ring with somebody like Charlie. Like he is clearly in an unhealthy position, and I've at least walked out of doctors' offices with guys telling me like, "Hey, you're looking good," like that like, right. But there has definitely always been a consistent thing in my life where I have focused on this sort of thing, like weight, right? I think that's true for a lot of people, especially in America, and especially with people that are as tuned into culture the way that we are. But there's this contingency of people that really took issue with the ways in which he won this award this year and all in this character and this story because of the ways in which this is portrayed and his weight is portrayed negatively and all of this sort of stuff. To that, I want to make it extremely clear where I personally stand on that, and I don't know if you care to even take a stand, Dev, but this idea that his health is not good in this movie.
no.
This is obesity to a level that is not celebratory in any fashion. I think that there is a unhealthy way in which in this country specifically, people in my life specifically, look at weight and they despise anybody that's over the recommended like fat levels and all of this shit, like the ways in which some people in the world, and again specifically in this country and specifically in my life and blah blah blah, like the ways in which some people look at the idea of obesity and overweight and all of this and like are immediately turned off by it, that is not good, right? I don't think that that's what's going on in this movie.
No.
I want to try and give this movie some credits in the ways in which it never makes you think about all fat people as being gross in this way. This movie is so specifically niche about what's going on with Charlie and the ways in which his health is off the fucking rails that I couldn't equate it to anybody else in my life. There isn't anyone I know like this. And in some ways, it's the same way I feel about something like What's Eating Gilbert Grape, right? Which is another movie that often gets criticized for the ways in which it portrays their mother as being obese in that movie, right? But again, it's absurd. Like, and I know that that can be kind of an offensive term to use in this conversation, but it's an important historically accurate one for what is being shown on screen. Absurdity is a tool used by filmmakers in order to express stuff, right? And like that is what is being done here. It is to a point that it is unreal what is happening to Charlie, and the unfortunate reality is that it's not completely unreal. But another important conversation to have. I think the only place where this movie truly drops the ball in the regard of Charlie's weight, specifically focusing on the idea of his weight, I think the only place where they drop the ball is they don't go into a deeper conversation about the mental health stuff behind it. I wish that they would. Other than that, I think this movie is completely fair, kind, and generous to anybody out there going through what Charlie's going through. It just also recognizes that it is a tragedy.
Yeah, I mean, the discussion about fat phobia, first of all, America as a country, as a nation, is fat phobic. Let's just put that out there. I will say it. I'll say it. What we are shown on TV are fit, thin people. What we see in magazines, everything that is fed to us as a society glamorizes being thin, right? And also being fit too, right? Because I knew the guys in like high school, or like some people that we knew in college, who were very thin and then also felt like but they're too thin, or they're not attractive thin, right? Or you're thin but you don't have muscle or tone. So like you don't have that value either. Like, we glamorize in America a very certain sort of unattainable look. And I don't know what that is, but that's just where we're going to start the discussion from my side of
I do think it's important to recognize outside of America, it's not like fat people are beloved. In fact, in a lot of places outside of America, a lot of overweight people are straight up demonized, right? Like the idea of like it's hard to talk about this as an American because I don't have the view of an outsider, but there is often conversations about the ways that the people outside of the US look at the US as the fatties, right? Like we are the ones that are just the overweight ones of the world. And with fair reason. There are numbers to back that concept up. But like the ways in which obesity or overweightness, or even I say obesity, I want to make sure that I'm clear about this. Obesity is unfortunately a very measurable thing that like a lot of people in this country are, even though they wouldn't call themselves that. By scientific terms, you might actually be, right? Like I think I am. I think I qualify by what the term technically scientifically means. I think that my medical records probably say something like that, right?
A woman that I used to work with, when we came back from the health fair, both of us were determined obese because they base it off of your BMI. Now, I clearly am obese, and I have no issue with that. Like, I know what I am, and I have been working and making strides to do better about that, right? But that woman, is just because she's short and has, like, muscle that, like, oh, but that's too much on there, right? Well, so she's like, I can't believe that they would say that I'm obese. And, like... It's
and
I
would
medical.
say that like it's a complicated issue, and like BMI is even like a super like targeted thing. Like people argue about what that means all the time, and rightly so. Like I want to make that clear, is like these are ongoing conversations. To act like there's an end all be all like answer to any of this is ridiculous. That's not how the human condition works. Like we are constantly learning more and more about ourselves. So like our values and our definitions have to be constantly evolving to go along with it. Some might even say legal documentation that runs a country maybe should as well, but that's a separate conversation. But like this idea that like we as humans, like there is something about the idea of being overweight that really does like affect us, whether or
Mm-hmm.
not we're outright quote unquote disgusted or whatever. And you're right, there is definitely a streak in this country to be straight up fat phobic. And I think that like the idea of fat phobia is a real thing. This is not me trying to negate that in any way.
Yeah.
I think that looking at a movie like The Whale and discussing its moments of fat phobia are important. I think the movie's using those tools to their credit. I think they're well aware that that's kind of some of the stuff that people are going to pick up on. That's literally why they show it. To say that it like promotes fat phobia or like gives ammunition to fat phobic people, like I just like maybe I think that the message is more important than that, though, in that it is talking about this person that has gone through this event that has caused this. Like it spends so much time talking about where Charlie's health problems come from,
Mm-hmm.
that as much as it doesn't discuss like what he should do about them, like it at least acknowledges that this is not just the way of things. It's a hard conversation to thread, right? And this is something that even like the actors get questions about when they were out like touring, right? And I think Fraser's exact quote is something along the lines of, this is the kind of movie that wants to talk about that, right? Like you can ask these questions about fat phobia, you can say all this stuff you want about the ways in which like this movie might make people who are overweight look bad, but I think this is actually one of the few movies that's trying to do better, right? And whether or not it succeeds, that's up to the audience. But I think it's important to really hone in on the conversation that this movie is having about overweight peoples, and it's not like an immediate write-off of them. Charlie is the protagonist of our story, and he does want to get better, and maybe getting better means something about his weight, although that's never truly his goal, right? It's the goal of other people around him. They say things to him like, you need to lose weight, especially Liz, like as his
Mm-hmm.
nurse, trying to say to him like, you need to be in better condition, your body needs to be in better condition if you want to live. Like I think it's definitely there, but I think for Charlie it doesn't ever really come up that he wants to fix this thing. Part of that is because he's punishing himself, right? But like it's I think it's an interesting conversation worth having. I don't think writing this movie off because you feel like it's fat phobic is fair.
No.
I think talking about this movie because you think it's fat phobic is totally on the table, though.
Yeah, and what I was gearing up to is a fat phobic movie, and it's one that we've covered, is Shallow Fucking Hell. Just Shallow Hell. I'm sorry I added the cuss word in the center there. Shallow Hell is fat phobic. That movie, the fact that Rosemary breaks almost every chair that she sits in is fucking offensive. Like that, you want an example of something that just the joke is that this woman is overweight, and here's how we're going to show it. Like that movie is what I would point to. I would not point to this movie. In fact, Elvis, right? Elvis Presley, also someone who in his later years gained a lot of weight, right? After watching that movie, I'm like, it's 2023. I don't love that we still do fat suits, but you would think that we would do a better job with our fat suit, like, prosthetic technology, right? Because it's still, like, you can see where it's makeup or prostheses applied to Austin Butler's face. And then here comes the fucking whale.
Yeah, and then you get to the whale where they literally win awards for their
they win an
makeup.
Oscar for the makeup and that work and hairstyling and stuff, and it's just like, and like the way that it sits on his body seems natural based upon things that we see of people who are over 600 pounds, right?
Well, and importantly, not somebody that naturally got there over the course of their life, but has maybe only gotten there in the last like few years of their life, because there is certain ways in which like the fat falls on his body, like that it isn't a full on like he's not a round person. He is what would be referred to as pear shaped, right? Like there's all sorts of stuff applied to. We get to see a moment where he takes his shirt off, and we see the ways in which some of the muscles on his body have fallen because they've atrophied and stuff like that. Like there's there's so much more physicality to his body than just like he's fat, which I think is the other big thing that really makes it an interesting conversation in terms of the fat phobia is because like something like Shallow Hal, where what they do with Gwyneth Paltrow in that movie every time they put her in a fat suit is they just like add pillows to every curve of her body, and it's like not everybody. That's not how people fill out, right? Like that's not natural. So like on top of everything, they look like fucking like the Dursleys in Harry Potter when they or the fucking Blueberry Girl in Willy Wonka, right? Like there's not that's not how people grow. That's not how people get wide. Like this movie and the makeup in it specifically, the ways in which it explores what actually happens to the human body when it punishes itself, right? Like even to some of the male pattern baldness that you see in what's going on with Charlie is a result of poor eating habits and stuff like that. And it just there's so much there's so much thought behind the character work and the costuming of this character that it's really hard to say they didn't care. I think it's quite the opposite.
Yeah.
They cared quite a bit. Where they misguided in some of their choices, that's where I think the conversation really needs to stem. It needs to stem from. And that's just not what I hear anybody talking about in that regard. You know, everybody just wants to write it off because they see the name, they see the poster, which is just, you know, Fraser's face done up in the suit, and like they're just like done with it. And you know, if you don't want to see the movie because of that, that's fine. But you have to admit at that point that you didn't put the 2 hours in, so you can't like levy a bunch of like nonsense criticism against it without having watched it, right?
Yeah. And also, the marketing for this movie, I had no idea what this movie was about based on the marketing. Like, I feel like they only sold it on that picture of Brendan Fraser's face. I can't think of a single trailer that I saw or anything like that. It's just Darren Aronofsky, Brendan Fraser, the movie's called The Whale. Look, he looks overweight in this one photo. Like, don't you want to go see this movie? And I don't know. Did you see a trailer for this? Had you seen anything to like market this film to you?
Yeah, it was a lot of like shots of him being super sweaty and what's the big line that he has? I just want to do one thing in my life. That line
Yeah.
was always kind of what they leaned on. But I mean like it wasn't much more than that. You know, I had no idea. Like I knew his daughter was in it. I had no idea that there was a nurse character. I had no idea about any of the stuff with the religious stuff or anything like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So it's, I mean, and that's the type of stuff. And if you want to talk about the marketing for this film and what you just talked about, the marketing, definitely fat phobic. But that doesn't necessarily mean the film is fat phobic.
well, I think that's a hard thing to parse, though, right?
Yeah.
Like fairly to audiences, why would you ever disconnect the two, right? We know, you and I know, and people that listen to us bitch about this all the time know that like we talk about how marketing teams are sometimes completely separate even from studios, right? Like there are people out there that are brought in to market films that they don't watch the movie. They might not even get a full cut of the movie to put a preview together. So like all sorts of weird shit will happen in previews all the time. But like from that, like, you know, you get weird things like trailer trash and stuff like that, or you get weird things where like it sells on the wrong, what's the word I'm looking for? Tone of the film, things like that. Like, right. We've talked about all that sort of shit. But anybody outside of this conversation, like they're not gonna know that, and you know, so like when they see that it's being sold on that in that way, they associate that with the movie itself. You know, and I think that my like that's on the filmmakers and that's on the studios to put more pressure on these marketing teams to get their shit together.
Yeah. I mean, specifically, I just watched Scream 6. That was something I did this week. Again, we're not going to talk about it here, but I really was impressed to hear from the directors. We did this shot and we called cut and we looked at each other and said, we got to make sure they don't put this in the trailer. But oh my God, this is the shot that a marketing team would be like, this is how we're selling the movie. Yeah. Like, it is such an issue in Hollywood, the marketing of a movie and how it makes your film, you know, be interpreted. So, like, and we do talk about it and everything there, but then, yeah, so you have fat phobic marketing, so then people think the movie is fat phobic, and then on the back of that, well, I'm not going to go see that movie, and it supports what you said. It's that, like, well, if you think this film is fat phobic, then you clearly didn't see the movie. because
I don't, like, I don't want it to be that easy, because if you watch this movie and still feel that way, like I
and
said,
then
I
you're
do think there's still
everybody
a
can have their
conversation
feelings.
to be had
Yes,
there.
yeah, that's you're right. I mean, opinions are formed the way that opinions are formed, and it's not that. But I think that this movie, as a heavier gentleman myself, does a pretty good job at being respectful towards somebody who is in that condition. It doesn't look like that person's not really fat. Like that's a really fit person in a fat suit. It does not look like that. The way that he moves, everything they put so much time into the science. Like the fact that when he is choking, what Liz has to do because of how big he is, there's no way she could give him the Heimlich maneuver. So she has to use the gravity one, where you just kind of force it up and out and gravity pulls it out of the windpipe.
Right.
Like that whole thing of it. The way that he moves when he like goes to stand up with the walker, or the way that he moves when he's trying to walk without the walker. Like those there's just so much in this movie that is, I don't know. But I mean, the whole question of fat phobia is the fact that like now we have people who are saying that like I'm large and I'm not going to stop that from letting me be a famous person or have a career in the creative arts. So like it's like this weird time in history that we're living through. And I'll say this, and you can approach me however you want. I'm a big guy, right? You don't know that if you're just hearing my voice, but if you saw me, you'd be like, "Oh, that's a big guy," right? And that comes from my entire life being told that I'm a big guy, and not understanding that like just because I'm like stocky from playing hockey, that doesn't necessarily mean I'm fat, right? But that's what I was. I was called fat in first grade, and I have felt that way my entire life. And then like Adam Sandler when he says that he's fat, or Simon Pegg being in Run Fat Boy Run and being Simon Pegg. Like it's just like, are you fat? Like you're a Hollywood ideal of fat. Like that's what Hollywood wants, a fat person. I don't know. It frustrates me just the conversations about that stuff. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, it is a frustrating conversation, right? And it is one that this movie invites in so many ways, not just the marketing, like the nature of the film itself invites that conversation. And so like it is this idea that this movie is really trying to explore the idea of his weight being attached to his mental health. And I think where this movie fails, and the reason why people I think feel that way, is because I don't think the movie does a great job of really having that conversation of mental health. Right. And so like I do think there is some fair criticism to be levied there. The problem becomes is that the fair criticism gets marred by some of the unfair criticism that just gets thrown at everything nowadays, and it just all kind of snowballs. And I'm glad that a movie like this was able to kind of just keep going, right? Like we don't always see things get that chance. Often those kinds of dark, kind of fucked up conversations that aren't clear can lead to somebody saying something super inappropriate or stupid, or somebody deciding, or some company deciding they don't want to have that conversation anymore and pulling the product, that kind of thing. But this movie just persisted, and we got this movie, in front of us as an end result, and I'm happy for it.
Yeah, I don't know. It is. I don't know. I don't know how to feel about it. I just know that I was going through pictures of myself in high school for our Dazed and Confused cover art, and I'm like, wow, I thought I was fat back then. And honestly, no, not compared to what I am now. And I don't like want to say that. I don't want to be down on it. It's just, I don't know. And this is the other thing, is that I'm out in the world again now, right? The pandemic, we're still not past it, right? I've heard of a bunch of people who have like come down positive with COVID in the last 2 weeks. So like I'm still playing more cautious with myself and going out there. But as I go out, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but like post-pandemic where people were stuck in the house without much to do and it was hard to do it, I would say that like I have noticed the population is a little bit rounder. And on some level, that makes me happy that, like, we all, like, said, fuck this ideal that Hollywood is trying to shove down our throats of what we have to be. I kind of just want to be happy. and I'm going to eat the things that make me happy. Now, again, getting to 600 pounds the way that Charlie does in this movie, like, there's got to be something else there, right? And something that you should try to identify and work on. But, like, I was on Thayer Street a couple of weeks ago, and I'm looking at the people, and I'm just like, this is nice. It's nice to see, like, just not a bunch of waifs walking around Thayer Street.
It's the larger thing is like this idea that us as an outsider can have any type of knowledge or understanding of what's going on in a person's life that leads to things like physical expression across the board is just not, it doesn't make sense to me, right? Like this is, you know, making fun of or judging someone based on their weight is like judging someone based on their clothes, is like judging someone based on tattoos, is like judging someone based on an injury or a, you know, a missing limb or something like that. Like it's like we don't know what is going on in a person's life, and to take some type of physical attribute and somehow make an assumption off of that is ridiculous, right? And I think that this movie is thinking and talking about that. I mean, look at the ways, we haven't talked about it much, but look at the ways in which Charlie teaches his class where he doesn't have the camera on. And it's like a big moment when he does, and they all kind of react, and then he throws this thing. Or I hinted at earlier, the ways in which the pizza guy reacts to Charlie's weight when he sees him for the first time. And the movie, Charlie thinks that the ways that people are reacting are A, B, and C. He thinks that they're reacting in disgust. I actually think this movie does a really interesting move in that we never see anybody call him like we don't see any of these people he's worried about, like his students or the pizza guy, like say anything to him, and their reactions are ones of surprise because like it's just like I think it's a legitimate matter of it's just not what they're expecting. Now that is an interesting conversation in and of itself, this idea that people just don't expect to see this overweight figure, and that somehow is what like throws them, is like kind of getting to what you're saying, is this idea that we've all been kind of fed this ideal of what people look like. So when we're kind of in a position to create a person in our head, how many of us are like create an overweight person? No, it never happens, right? And so when we finally see someone for the first time and we realize, oh my God, they look different to us, that difference is only just he's more weight than I thought, right? And it's a wild, it's like again a conversation this movie introduces but doesn't really have.
Yeah, because it's I do think that the pizza guy seeing him, right? And it's like, that's like a split second sort of thing. Like, I feel like on some level, I mean, Charlie's clearly at that moment, he's almost at the bottom of his barrel anyway, right? He hasn't hit rock bottom yet. And you hear it from the pizza guy who, that's the only new, like, that's not the only one. It's one of the new relationships we see formed in this week, is the fact that this guy who's been delivering pizza to him for however long actually introduces himself and tells him his name. And it's because the couple of times he's delivering, Charlie is in some sort of distress. So like legitimately, I'm here every day dropping off 2 pizzas for you. Is everything okay? Like that whole thing. And then I like the pizza guy is not waiting, I think, for like a gotcha moment to like catch him and finally get to see this guy. I think like it's just one of those situations where it happens, and then the pizza guy feels like, oh my God, I got caught, right? Even if I wasn't doing anything wrong, it's like
it's a moment of, if it's a moment of social interaction, like he's just like, oh, I didn't intend for this, bye-bye, and he like runs off into the night, and then, you know, Charlie, because of everything that we know about Charlie, takes that the wrong way. But I don't think that means that pizza guy is like offended by him in any way.
Yeah, no, I don't think that is like, oh my God, look at the monster. It's like, no, why? What in that pizza guy's life would make him pass judgment that way, right? Like, you're not. I don't know. Like that's it, and it's sad that it does kind of trigger what happens afterwards. But like, it also makes sense just on a societal level, just on a mental health level. Of I wasn't expecting that to be what you looked like, and also I feel like you might look at me interpreting like I was trying to catch you and catch a glimpse of the monster and whatever it is. But then like Charlie's reaction is the fact that like I never wanted him to see me, right? And then like it doesn't just have to be about the weight. And like it's like something that a doctor said to me years ago. I had like skin rashes and things, and I said, you know, people keep telling me that it might be stress, and this doctor goes so mad at me. He's like, stress does not present symptoms. It can be a cause, but stress on its own is not giving you a rash. And it's one of those situations where I'm like, yeah, okay, so there's always multiple things working together in this moment to get whatever the outcome is.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, and because it's like blink and you do it, and everything else up to that point, like, all you're thinking, right? Like, I think the initial reaction to that is, oh, he's upset because this guy saw him and was reviled by seeing him. So then there's the reaction. But then, like, if you parse it out, like, there's a million things that could have happened in that moment.
Yeah. It's just this, like, the idea that this movie really wants to introduce, like, Charlie's health as a kind of visual factor to how he's doing mentally is important to the plot and interesting, and then the movie just doesn't parse it out any more than that. And I think that is probably the biggest failing of this film, because otherwise, like, it's a beautiful exploration of his relationship with his daughter. It's a beautiful exploration of his relationship with his own self and his sexuality, and like the ways in which Liz gets upset with him with the financial stuff. Although I will say $120,000 probably would not be nearly enough money to do any of the stuff that she talks about him needing to do for his health. But that's a different conversation.
Well, I mean, a little bit of that could get him health insurance.
Right.
And then health insurance,
he
like,
get the ball rolling.
Yeah,
right.
it could start it. But then the other, like, the moment in that one that sticks with me is she's like, so when my truck broke down and I had to walk for your groceries in the snow, and he's like, I offered to fix it. She's like, yeah, but I didn't take the money from you because I didn't know you had the money. And it's like, but at the same time, he did offer. Like if he didn't have the money, he might not have offered. Like, it's such like a weird, like, how perspective works in that moment. Because she's like, I thought you had $700 to your name. And it's like, well, if your car needed more than $700 worth of work, like, what? Who could have helped you anyway? Right? Like what was the assistance that you needed? Could you have rented a car for a week? Now, it's 2016, so renting a car would not have been the arm and a leg that it is now, right? It probably would have been like $200 for that. And again, he has low costs, and like, even if she said, I can pay you back, like, that was one of the missteps for me, where she's like, you have all this money, and he's like, I don't really do anything. And she's like, but this, and he's like, but I offered to help you and you said no. Like, he doesn't seem like the type of person, based on the week that we spend in him in the movie, who would offer, like, empty platitudes. Like, if he's offering to help her, like, it's because I can back it up. Does that make sense? Like, I don't.
Yeah, but just because somebody offers to help you and you don't want, like, there's I can definitely understand why she reads it that way. Look at the way he lives. Like, he could say he wants to help all he wants, but if she looks around and says, like, I'm not going to take what might be your last $1,000, I understand why she doesn't take it. And I understand her surprise at what he's got later. It just was, to me, I think they should have given him a little bit more than the 120.
Than the 120,000.
Yeah, out as a number. But that was all.
But it was also 2016, right? It was the craziest thing about this movie is that it takes place in 2016, because he teaches online at a college, which feels hyper relevant post the COVID-19 pandemic, right? With remote learning. It just, like, there's so many things that make it feel like it's taking place in straight modern times. But then you think about 2016, and I mean, one of the things that, like, would just make me retch right now and start dry heaving is just how much the value of the dollar has shifted in those 7 years.
Yeah. I still think $120,000 in 2016 was not enough money for him to get all the help he would need. But yeah.
Right. Well, especially that late down the line, right? Like, that reaction from Liz is also, if I knew we had this money as we were going along, you could have gotten health insurance, which would have mitigated the cost of things, right? We could have, when it was starting to see you earlier putting on weight, we could have maybe got you some help from a therapist and things like that, you know? Like we could have tried to attack the mental problem before the thing that needs to be triaged is your physical health. It's one of those situations where, like, money, if I knew about this money earlier, you would not be in this situation. It's not like with $120,000 now, we could completely turn your life around, if that makes sense. Right? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, it's. I was there anything else like
Nope.
to do here? Have we parsed everything out? Like, any other thoughts on this? I love Ellie. I think that character is fantastic. I think the haiku moment was fantastic. Even with like the body language. I knew it was a haiku right away.
There's a lot in this movie to celebrate. It's a hard one to watch. So I like you don't know if I'll be jumping back into it soon, but I do really appreciate that I saw it, and I totally appreciate that he's the one that walks away with the Oscar with it.
Yeah, and it's nice to see after years and years of celebrating like his body of work. I mean, even just look at the other movies that we looked at here, right? The academic setting was the one behind Hairbrained, but Gods and Monsters, With Honors, and Glory Days, they're all sprinkled with like Oscar talent, be it getting Oscar nominated in the terms of something like With Honors or Gods and Monsters, but then like 5 people who went on to win Oscars, Academy Awards, are in the movie Glory Days.
Yeah.
Like, it's just he's there. He's part of this thing, and it's nice to see that he finally got the recognition. And honestly, I'm also happy that it's for a movie like this where he clearly put in the work. And I'm happy that it's as a leading man, like in a leading role. Like I have a lot of things that, like, we used to do more coverage on the Oscars at this show. That's just a fact, Jack. And we don't do it. We don't do the Oscar coverage we used to do because, you know, I the hypocrisy of it all. I don't know. It's like we had
it's boring.
Yeah. But I have a lot of problems with the difference between what is a supporting actor and what is a lead actor. But for him to finally get his much like deserved award, for it to be as the leading role, that makes me very happy. I don't know. Congratulations, Brendan, from the Say Report. Yeah. Anything else, or are you ready to close off this Brendan Fraser History Month for 2023?
Yeah, I think that we've spent the last 5 weeks really diving into some stuff, and I'm happy that we kept it up long enough for him to win.
Yeah, right.
The payoff.
But that doesn't mean that this is the end of Brendan Fraser History Month. We will be back next year, and as I have promised at the beginning of this, I will say it here too. Extreme Measures and Still Breathing will be 2 of the films covered next year. I'm very excited to watch both of those films and then report on them in an episode. But we did him winning the award. We really had to call an audible, and I think we called the best possible audible we could have with the stuff we ended up watching. Right? I cannot. The thematic stuff that like rolled into this movie. Like, I didn't think about the Moby Dick connection of it all. And while we were joking about Moby Dick being referenced in Airheads and we want 68 copies of Moby Dick.
Oh, I thought that's why you kept talking about Moby Dick.
No, I had no idea. I thought it was the whale because of his size and like it being a derogative term that people used to refer to him in like the town. Oh, you're delivering food to the whale's house? I didn't realize this movie was going to be so like insular and self-contained the way that it was. And it worked. I mean, down to the fact that the 4:3 full frame aspect ratio also makes it feels cramped and claustrophobic. And it has that nice thematic thing of it being that window of his class that is blank for his class, but that we get to see into. Like, there's all sorts of freaking cinematography and stupid subtext and subtlety in this movie that all accentuates the film. I'm being a jerk about it, but yeah, it accentuates the movie. But the thing is that this is just because he won the award, there's still plenty of Brendan Fraser history that we haven't yet celebrated, and it will continue. And we're going to ask for you in the interim, like this week, if you have anything to send to us, send it at the Say Report. Anything that you think that is worth talking about in May. I know I have some Tears of the Kingdom stuff to share and some films that I saw. So yeah, at the Say Report for anything like that. But thank you for joining us for the 7th season of Brendan Fraser History Month at the Say Report. It's been a wild ride.
Yeah, indeed.
All right. Yeah, so that's it. Thanks again. And William, why don't you bring us home?
Thank you for listening to the Say Report with your host Devon Decker and Stephen Serwick. Please follow the guys on Twitter and Facebook by searching for The Say Report, and you can always subscribe on your podcast channel so this is delivered straight to you and you can enjoy it every week. With apologies to your mother, we'll see you next time.